Good morning. It is February 8th, Sunday morning, and we are so glad to welcome Jim Kenney back to Macomb Solel Lakeside virtually. And let me just, I know he needs no introduction, but which does not stop me from giving an introduction. He has been recognized for decades. Well, he's been speaking to us for decades as a leader in the global movement for intercultural understanding, working to promote harmony and cooperative action among the world's religious communities. He had a major role in the two largest interreligious gatherings ever held in 93 and 99 parliaments of the world's religions. Today, he is talking to us about, I have to bring it up here, um, MAGA, Greenland, and the other ICE, a snapshot of our political moment. And with no further ado, Jim, I'm going to spotlight you and take it
Okay,
away.
thanks, Vanessa. And we'll go about an hour or so and 15, and then we'll turn it over. Vanessa will host the questions and so on. So, not as we go along. I can't respond if you chat to me or send me a message. I can't respond without shutting down the whole sharing. But anyway, let me just say again, repeat what Vanessa said. This is, and clarify a little bit. This is about, I say MAGA, Make America Great, the Make America Great movement. We'll talk about it incessantly, let's say, as we go. But MAGA, Greenland, and I called it the other ice. Greenland being one ice, and you know the ice we're going to be talking about today. Customs, immigration and customs enforcement, such as it is. Anyway, I decided to begin with a little tiny script. And so yesterday I wrote down my own little definition of MAGA. And if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to read it. And the rest of this will be sort of unscripted, although there's plenty of words that pop up on the slides that we'll be moving through. Anyway, my definition of MAGA, of the Make America Great movement, is a right wing, no question about that, a right wing populist movement. We'll talk a little bit more about populism that's built on white and especially white male grievance and resentment of supposedly corrupt and controlling liberal elites. The movement is, of course, centered on Donald Trump, and it's energized by his countless fictions. Sure, you know what I'm talking about. MAGA adherents claim that America was once great and must be restored through hardline America First. We'll go through all of these things, but America First policies, restrictive immigration measures, drastic reduction of the administrative state, and you know, if you watched the whole Doge adventure, the drastic cuts in virtually every branch of the administrative, governmental, federal state, but especially hard hit were organizations that have to do with public health, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and most terrifying of all, the Centers for Disease Control, reduced to shadows of their former selves. Drastic reduction of the administrative state and a return to traditional social hierarchies. I want to make sure you understand what I'm getting at here. Social hierarchies is white over all others, but also side by side with that is men over women. That's extremely important to the MAGA movement. And an interesting feature that has developed this year is what is called the trad wives movement, the trad wives, traditional wives. And they often appear in granny dresses, offering on YouTube, offering recipes, house cleaning tips, child rearing tips, and so on. The message is crystal clear. The husband is the Lord and master. The wife stays home and essentially stays quiet. So we'll say a word or two about that. But perhaps most important is that the movement also leads very strongly in the direction of anti-democratic and authoritarian rule. So that's my take on ICE. I'm going to start the sharing. This takes a minute, and then we'll be ready to go. Almost. There's so many little things they have to do that you can't see,
I
but
can
you
only
would see them.
imagine. We can
Right.
see it though.
Yeah. Okay. There. That's my title screen. MAGA, Greenland, and Ice. That first slide, that's first image there is, of course, from January 6, 2021. Come and take it. You may notice the flag off to the right. That shows a superhero, super built image of Donald Trump carrying a rocket propelled grenade launcher, of course. And here's a map of Greenland with a superimposition of the American flag. This image was posted on YouTube by Katie Miller. Who's Katie Miller? She is the wife of Stephen Miller, and it was posted with the caption "Soon." And here is the other ice. The streets of Minneapolis, but they've been in LA and Chicago and, New York as well. And here's something that I didn't feature in the introduction or in the description, and that's the Christian nationalist movement. You can't talk about MAGA, you can't talk about ICE, you can't talk about the whole Donald Trump movement, if you will, without understanding that it is at base essentially a Christian nationalist movement, and that's extremely important. So let's start, though, by talking a little bit about the Make America Great thing. I want to see here. I think I may have to restart this and check with you to make sure you're seeing everything, because I should be seeing your images and mine, and I'm not. Bear with me. I'm sorry to have to do this, but it does happen. The wonders of Zoom. Spend half my life on Zoom, and it still perplexes me.
Yeah. I usually do a prayer to the technology gods before I start.
I think that's St. Elmo. I'm only half guessing when the Vatican had to identify a god for computers. Curiously enough, they did indeed pick Saint Elmo, who before
Did
that
not know
time
that.
had been the patron saint of sailors. Sailors. Go figure. I have no explanation for it. Almost. Bear. I'm sorry. I never should have left, and it's not going to be working right when I go back in. But no, it's not. Let's hope the rest of this goes a little better. Okay. I don't have the images. That's fine. But who was it that first said, make America great again? Well, if you ask Donald Trump, he's got an answer.
Ronald Reagan.
You're right. It was Ronald Reagan, but let me drop the punchlines. Uh, Donald Trump says the line of "Make America Great Again." That was mine. I came up with it, and I kept using it. Everybody's using it now. This is typical Donald Trump ease, and they're all loving it. But as you said, it was Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush used it as. I mean, George H.W. Bush used it as well during that campaign, and it was picked up. Here's Ronald Reagan, another poster picked up later by Bill Clinton in 1992, and he used the phrase "Make America Great Again." And then in 2016, Bill Clinton was back using the phrase again, this time in support of Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And here's Donald Trump issuing a 2020 coin, U.S. coin, with the logo or the caption "Make America Great." America, by this time in 2020, has already been restored to greatness by Trump's first term. So now it's "Keep America Great." But it's kind of interesting. There are the three that used it: Reagan and Clinton and Trump. But they used it variously. This is a very ambiguous slogan. Bill Clinton used it one way, Ronald Reagan another, and Donald Trump another way. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I shouldn't have pushed that button. Anyway, when Ronald Reagan spoke about making America great again, His idea was to restore America's economic and geopolitical greatness. A big part of his first campaign in 1980 was that we had begun to drift economically and geopolitically. We were not the powerhouse that we once were, and he sought to and set out to renew that. That's what making America great meant to Ronald Reagan. To Bill Clinton, it was all about the middle class. And his great themes were opportunity and hope. For Donald Trump, it's a very different thing. And he's made it clear again and again and again that when he talks about making America great, he's talking about clarifying boundaries, gender boundaries, racial boundaries, geopolitical boundaries, you name it, defining who the real Americans are, which culture should dominate here and abroad, what changes that have taken place in previous administrations need to be reversed, and which institutions out there need to be distrusted and reformed. For example, the Fed is corrupt, the CDC is corrupt, and so on. That's what it means to Donald Trump. Well, you can't talk about the MAGA movement and its connection to Donald Trump without understanding the relationship between the populist voter, if you will, and the demagogue. Demagogue, as you probably know, it comes from the Greek and it means leader of the people, the same root for people that we have in democracy. Gogein in Greek means to lead, but demagogue is one who leads the people, but we know that term has come to mean not the leader of the people, but the misleader of the people. Now, if you go back to the first part of the 20th century, there was a very strong American populist movement. One of its champions was William Jennings Bryan, and he took up the cause of people that were really disadvantaged, that were really beset by elites. In this case, the elites were wealthy people on the East Coast who ran the railroads and all of the other great business empires and took advantage of the people that he sought to protect. Largely Western farmers and miners who had to depend on the railroads to get their goods, whether their ores or their produce, to get it to market. That would cost them. They were manipulated, gouged, and so on. And Bryan tried to take up their cause. And that's what populism meant in the early part of the 20th century. But by the time we get to mid-century, it has come to mean something very different. A number of demagogues have taken up the cause, the populist cause, if you will, including people like Huey Long, Father Charles Coughlin, and others that you may remember, and all the way down to, I would say, Ross Perot and Donald Trump. But now populism means, as a political tactic, as a political scheme, a political approach, means manipulating the fears and hatreds of ordinary people, convincing them that they are beset by venal, evil, corrupt, liberal, largely, elites, and that you alone can protect them. That's the role of the demagogue. In any case, the populist today is one who believes that his life has been diminished by societal changes. His life has been diminished by the lifting up of people of color, by the endowment of women with rights and privileges that they previously did not enjoy, and so on, and the recognition of other religions. Here's the poor white male populist who absolutely is convinced that the fact that he is a white male Christian should always have been his ticket. But all of a sudden, being white is no guarantee. Being male comes with its own problems, and being Christian is not an advantage at all. Or so he is led to believe. By whom? By the demagogue. You get the basic drift. The populist is one who feels aggrieved and at the mercy of corrupt elites. But here's an interesting twist. And of course, the demagogue comes in, and as Donald Trump said at his first Republican convention, his nomination speech, said, "I alone can fix it. I alone can help." But it's interesting to note that today, the populist is not worried about wealthy elites. Instead, the populist is worried about educated elites, about academic elites, about experts. And what's interesting is that this populist voter bloc is never at all self-directing. Populists have to, in essence, I'm simplifying it here, but they have to wait for the demagogue to spell out just exactly what their grievances are. You may not know it, people, but you have been beset. You have been manipulated from the time of your birth, right up to today, right up to this moment, by educated elites, by the experts who tell you how you ought to vote and how you ought to conduct your life and so on. I'm going to move the little block that appears at the top of the screen. So the demagogue is there to tell you what your fears and hatreds really ought to be, who's responsible for the ills that you are suffering, which the demagogue explains to you, and how it is that he can help you rid yourself of those. So often the populist voter is culturally confused. Stop the world, I want to get off. And very often in the throes of identity crisis, I sort of sketched that out. I'm white, but I'm not sure what that means anymore. I'm male, but I'm confused about my status in a changing society, a gender changing, gender fluid in many ways society. And I'm Christian, but what does that mean today? So the populist, being culturally confused and often troubled by identity crisis, becomes very vulnerable to the demagogue. And it was Mussolini who coined the term fascist, who understood that situation and understood it well. This is Mussolini with an Italian crowd of absolutely populist voters in 1934. And there's just a little reminder of a resonance. This is a painting that I have loved for a long time. It's by a German expressionist named Magnus Zoller, and it was painted in 1920. It's actually called The Orator, but to me, it captures the spirit of the populist and the demagogue. And here's H.L. Mencken, one of my favorite curmudgeons, who says the demagogue is one who preaches doctrines he knows to be untrue to men he knows to be idiots. So we hear all the time that this is a fascist movement, and I'm going to suggest that the MAGA movement and the whole movement that surrounds Donald Trump is not precisely fascist, but it is, to use a term that is often used in scholarly circles, it's proto-fascist. It's on the way. It's the proto-fascism is the seedbed from which fascism, if it emerges, must necessarily emerge. The economics aren't there yet. The totalitarian state is not there yet. But the people that will make up a fascist regime are there, and they're in significant numbers. And this is a classic proto-fascist group. I want you to notice the guy in the helmet. You see the symbol he's making there, or the gesture he's making, and it looks like the classic AOK, but it's not. This is something you'll often see in these MAGA circles, and it is actually signing out a W and a P, and that the W is the three fingers raised, and the circle and one finger raised is the P, and what that stands for is white power. Typical proto-fascist traits: nationalism, problem with minorities, an ease with and even glorification of violence, and a yearning for the strong hand of the authoritarian. So just three examples from recent days. Venezuela, what was it? This is a fascistic foreign policy writ large. You've got domination, seizure of resources to which we are somehow entitled, and an absolute rejection of international law, of the UN Charter. In an interview right after the invasion of Venezuela with the New York Times, Donald Trump actually said, "I have no need for international law." Greenland? Boy, if this doesn't strike you as something straight out of the 30s, expansionism, small states have no legitimacy, and strategic land, if it is strategic to us, it becomes somehow rightfully ours, openly acknowledging the reality of talking about conquest. And ICE, well, I don't have to describe this to you. Raids, deaths in custody, murder in the streets, constitutional shortcuts, necessary self-defense of the nation. What's behind all of this? White Christian male grievance. Now, this very disturbing image here is from 2017, excuse me, in Charlottesville. And this was a rally, a huge rally called Unite the Right. It was a white supremacist rally, and ostensibly it was staged, it was brought together to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee. Keep that in mind as we go, because that's going to resonate with something we're going to bring up in a moment. But anyway, these people were marching, and as I'll look at them again and point out that they were chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." And then the blacks will not replace us. The Muslims will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us. This is a reference, as we'll see in a moment, to something called the Great Replacement Theory, which is a meme that is spread like wildfire on the far right. And it's the idea, completely unfounded, but the idea that there is an international movement to replace the white majorities in Europe and the United States, to replace them by immigration, by miscegenation, and when and if it becomes necessary, to replace them by violence. But it's the point of this conversation at this point is to understand that what we're talking about, the grievance that powers every populist movement, and the grievance that powers the MAGA movement, and on which Donald Trump constantly plays, is white Christian male grievance. And this powers MAGA. It also powers Christian nationalism. There's always, it's kind of interesting to point out that every fascist movement has a core story, and it's always a story of loss and restoration. But the core story here, and the core story of MAGA, is that white Christian men and their women should center the nation, but they've been displaced. They've been displaced by feminism, racial and religious equality, secularism, and this mysterious, elusive thing that drives the right wing nuts, wokeness. You know, it was a term that was first used by black musicians back in the 60s, and the expression, "Are you woke, man?" simply meant, are you aware of the reality of racial discrimination and of our nation's long history of racial discrimination and social injustice. Today, it essentially means, wokeness means aware of social injustice and committed to social justice. But it has become a bugaboo on the right. Anyway, the whole grievance thing provides urgency and permission. That's the important thing. We're beset, and that makes our situation absolutely urgent. And this gives us permission to pursue restoration projects, putting things back the way they never were, but the way they always should have been, restoring white male authority in politics, culture, and the family. America has never been a Christian nation, but a big part of this narrative is that America was founded as a Christian nation, was once a thoroughly Christian nation in law as well as in demographics, and needs to be that again. And a big part of all of that, again, every time someone enters, I have to restore the balance here. Okay, let me back that up again. The Lost Cause. This is actually a movement that got started in the late 1860s. A Southern Confederate veteran named Pollard wrote a book called The Lost Cause, in which he sang the praises of the noble Confederate warriors and made it clear to his Southern audience that the only reason the South lost was not because they lacked courage or expertise. They were by far the superior horsemen, by far the superior warriors. Their culture was much more sophisticated and genteel and educated than anything the North had to offer. They lost because of the mechanization and the population of the North, the factory North with its huge population. The uncouth, uneducated, uncivil North was able to defeat the South, by far the superior nation. So This is the story of the lost cause, and the lost cause took root. It was fed and nurtured by an interesting organization called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. They're the ones that put up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of statues of Confederate heroes all over the South and in other parts of the nation as well. They're the ones that gave the lost cause life and breath, and they're the ones who are responsible for the interesting fact that most of us, North or South, grew up with a lost cause version of the Civil War, which is to say the noble Southerners defeated, overwhelmed by Yankee advantage, but very noble, didn't deserve to be humiliated. And if you think about it, the stories that we grew up with, those of us who live in the North, stories of Uncle Remus, for example, the happy slave, who was celebrated in Disney's The Song of the South. I'm sorry, got distracted by memories of the Song of the South and trying to remember the theme song, but also Gone with the Wind. And the movie, the founding movie of the American cinematic history, Birth of a Nation. So here's some lost causers, some modern lost causers. Once again, I have to deal with this. And there's a poster with Clark and Vivian for Gone with the Wind. And Gone with the Wind's version of the Civil War is the Lost Cause version. And to the extent that we all find that charming and more or less accurate, it shows that we've all been brainwashed by the Lost Cause. And that image. And here, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which was released in 1916. The first public screening of Birth of a Nation was at the White House at the invitation of Woodrow Wilson. And afterwards, Wilson said to the press, "The tragic thing about it is that it's all so true." The modern rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan, which had all but vanished. This is based on a book by a guy named Thomas Dixon called The Klansman. But the modern rebirth of the Klan was occasioned by this movie. And the modern iconography and the outfits that we associate with the modern Ku Klux Klan all came from Birth of a Nation. And again, in Birth of a Nation, the Klansmen are heroes. The villains are carpetbaggers from the North, blacks who come down from the North and take all the jobs and begin to dominate the political order and so on, and violate Southern women until the Klan rises to come to their defense, to defend Southern womanhood, the fiery cross of the invisible empire, the Ku Klux Klan. And that speaks for itself. But here's an interesting thing. If we were to draw a set of parallels between the Lost Cause movement and MAGA, noble victimhood, the downplaying of racism, white supremacy denied, but nevertheless always resonant there, and Christian nationalist embedding, it's all there. They match point by point. So in a way, one could argue, as I have argued here, that MAGA needs to be understood as a new lost cause movement scaled up from the South to the entire nation. Just food for thought. And a lot of experts, I really want to say most, but I can't prove that, argue that Christian nationalism is really the dominant feature of MAGA. So I just love this image. Call it what it is. Make America white Christian nationalist. MAGA's interpretation of the Bible, I don't have to tell you this, is twisted, but it essentially uses its twisted version of biblical morality to defend against secularism and science, Remember, the anti-science that is such a basic core constituent of the MAGA movement and of the modern right wing, the resistance to science, it all begins with an opposition to evolutionary theory, to Darwinian evolution that comes straight out of evangelical, conservative, fundamentalist Christianity. That's where the mistrust of science. If science is right about biology and evolution, then how can they have climate change right? And since climate change is, or climate action is an inconvenience to us, why should we believe in climate change? Why should we believe in all this environmental stuff? They're just trying to control our lives, take our tax dollars, and so on. And it's science that tells us that the distinction between the races that we know to be real, we on the right, we know that the races differ in their qualities and character and so on. And science tells us there's no difference. Science tells us that the very category of race is essentially meaningless. So who should trust science? And COVID, almost certainly it was a hoax. We're all convinced of that. And vaccines are a scam to make money, perhaps to implant radio frequency IDs in all of us. Believe me, the range of wacky conspiracy theories on the far right and in the MAGA movement would blow your mind. Anyway, in addition to using twisted biblical arguments against science and racial equality, the movement uses those arguments against feminism. It's very clear that God intended the woman to be the helpmeet of man and man to dominate the roost. And LGBTQ rights, completely artificial, inauthentic, and very unbiblical. So what happens is this movement, the MAGA movement, puts together, and the Christian nationalist movement, white male grievance politics with biblical trimmings. And that the result is that power is centered for native-born white male Christians. So you could say that MAGA also sacralizes, which is to say makes holy, a strong executive authority. That's why Donald Trump is lifted up as an imperfect vessel for the will and intention and authority of Jesus Christ. And this little item here with Donald Trump's auto pen signature sells like hotcakes on the right. One more time, I have to get rid of stuff. I find this image very chilling, especially the woman on our left. Talking to you reminds me to clean my gun. And the guy over on the right, black rifles matter. Black rifles has nothing to do with black people. Automatic weapons are often black. Black rifles. Well, this group tells us something or embodies some of the craziness of MAGA, the craziness, the hatred, and the potential for violence. So I've just described it as the wellsprings, or what we're going to talk about as the wellsprings of MAGA madness. So this is a simple graphic, but one that packs, I think, a lot of information. So you've got grievance, and how do we break grievance down? Paranoia. I'm worried all the time. What the changes that are going on in my world have me absolutely confused, daunted, and in the throes. Insecurity. I used to be secure in my white male Christian identity, no longer. My identity has been threatened. So how does that manifest? How does this deep sense of grievance, discomfiture, cultural confusion, and identity crisis, how does it manifest? Well, as I've already suggested, the number one manifestation, and this might seem strange to you until you sort of mull it over and think about it for a while, and then I guarantee you'll start to notice it everywhere: science denial, one of the most characteristic features of the MAGA movement. There are three essential characteristic features that I've identified and talked about over the last few years: science denial, xenophobia. That almost goes without saying, doesn't it? The Greek word for stranger is xenos. So xenophobia is fear and hatred, you'd have to add, of the other, of the stranger. And finally, conspiracy mania. Boy, if you start to deny and unpack science, the world begins to fill with conspiracies and frightening things. That set of circumstances, that set of attitudes, if you will, is clearly unsustainable. But in the meantime, it can do so much damage, and it's doing it now. Here's another feature of the movement, America First. This is another term that Donald Trump has claimed again and again, unbelievably, but he has claimed to have coined this term, America First. Well, it's been around for much longer than that, and longer even than Charles Lindbergh, although Charles Lindbergh was associated with the America First movement right around the time of World War II, as the war was getting going, and as Americans were being importuned to enter the war on behalf of the Allies. But Charles Lindbergh headed up the movement that came to embody American isolationism. His movement, by the way, came to a crashing halt after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Nobody was an isolationist any longer. But I'll tell you, there was no shortage of isolationists before that time. And the America First movement, Charles Lindbergh, public hero, was the public face of the America First movement. And in his speeches, which were many, he constantly blamed two groups for the headlong rush of America toward the war. One was the British, who were desperate to save their bacon, if you will, perhaps an inappropriate choice of words, and the other was the Jews. The Jews were the ones who were really behind the effort to get the Americans into the war. But it's not our war. It's not our concern. It's a European concern. And today we have the Make America First Again movement that is Donald Trump's signature movement. We pledge allegiance to the one flag, the American flag, and from now on it's going to be America First. And there's that picture of Donald Trump hugging the flag. He does that at every opportunity. But America First is actually a long-time mantra for the right before even Charles Lindbergh. Here we're going back to the 1920s. The America First movement was associated at that time with the Ku Klux Klan. America First, one God, one country, one flag. And this is a commemorative coin that was issued actually recently, within the last 20 years, supposedly celebrating the anniversary of the rekindling of the Klan. The invisible empire, America First, preserve racial purity. And there's those marchers once again in Charlottesville, and they're marching and chanting, the Jews will not replace us, the blacks will not replace us, the Muslims will not replace us. As nationalism morphs into populism, and that's what you see happening here. We move from we're the best to we are the victims. And there's just a description of what I just told you, a reference to the Great Replacement hoax. This wonderful graphic, I hope you appreciate it as much as I do, with Donald Trump up on top. They're all Vikings. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, as you know, has since pretty much disavowed Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance. Back here in the back is Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. Here's the late, recently murdered, tragically, Charlie Kirk, Don Jr., and Marco Rubio. Over here in the boat, not allowed to join the celebration, is Elon Musk. This wonderful graphic appeared in the New Republic. And here's the article that it illustrated. I called it Make Greenland Great Again. But if you're interested in the whole background of the Greenland story, I really urge you to track down this article in the New Republic. It appeared in May. It was Christopher Hook's. Terrific article, easy to find. Just look for Real Men Steal Countries. You'll really enjoy it, and it will put things in context for you. So here's Greenland once again. And Trump, brought up the whole Greenland thing first in 2019, but now he's back, and now Greenland has become a vital national security concern for the defense of the Arctic and for the defense of our continent. And at the Davos Economic Forum in January, and we'll visit that in a moment, Trump spoke to the assembled powers of Europe and other economic leaders and so on, and said that absolutely, the United States insisted on full control of Greenland, that anything else was unacceptable. And he hinted very broadly that he would not shy away from the use of force to take Greenland if necessary. You can imagine the shocked silence that fell over the room. Now, Trump has said, no, we never were really thinking about the use of force. And he points often to some vague framework, that agreement, we don't have the details, but that would allow the U.S. and NATO to expand their military access, their resource access. Meanwhile, Greenland and Denmark are insisting that sovereignty is non-negotiable. Supposedly, meetings are going on, but this is an example of Trump being able to save face. But in typical Trump fashion, now he's back to talking about how desperately we really need Greenland. In his speech at Davos, he said, "We don't understand what the problem is. It's just a hunk of ice." So here's Davos, certainly a beautiful place to have a meeting. And here's Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, and Donald Trump. And I love this picture because Carney is just staring right through Trump, who seems to be unaware of what's going on. In any case, at Davos, what you had was a split screen. On the one hand, I'm going to just read through this, Trump's grievance nationalism. And on the other hand is Mark Carney talking about middle power realism. Realism means deal with the world not from an ideological point of view, but deal with it realistically. Deal with the idea that every nation will act in its own best interest and try to strike a balance between the interests of the one and the interests of the others. Middle power really galvanized the group when he began to speak of middle powers, because although that's a term that's well known in geopolitics, he had really centered it there in the Davos meeting, because of course the European nations gathered there can all be described as middle powers. They're not Russia, China, or the United States, the superpowers. They're middle powers. And Carney made it very clear that the power to decide the course of the world rests as much with the middle powers as it does with the supers. Anyway, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. On the one hand, you've got Trump making fun of those who believe in climate change and climate action, a waste of money, it's a hoax. It's speaking to a group who are just absolutely stunned at his ignorance. Meanwhile, Mark Carney steps up and talks about decarbonization. In other words, decarbonizing our reliance, our fuel reliance, and resilience as keys to strategic autonomy. Made perfect sense to that group. Trump threatened everyone there with Greenland and NATO issues, said NATO was useless, speaking to a group that includes some of the key players in NATO, all of the key players in NATO, telling them it's useless. Meanwhile, Carney is urging collective restraint and an order of rules. Trump personified what's being called fortress hegemony. Now, the United States, for the longest time, as long as we can remember, and Mark Carney made reference to that, has acted as a benign hegemon. Hegemon is the Greek equivalent of the Latin word tyrant, and both of those words did not carry a negative onus. It just meant the concentration of power in an individual or a state. But hegemony is dominance, geopolitical dominance. Benign hegemony, the United States guarantees the safety of much of the world. The United States and its reserve currency guarantees economic stability. The United States is there to make sure the world, as a system of cooperation, that it works. And Carney said, that made the European Union possible. It made NATO possible. And we've all sort of slept peacefully as long as the United States was a benign hegemon. And he said, but the United States is no longer a benign hegemon. And Trump, in all his words and his bluster in the big meeting, his big speech, and all the individual interactions, exemplified what is being called fortress hegemony. In other words, we retire to our powerful fortress. We do not want to be involved in your NATO or in your World Trade Organization or in your United Nations. We don't respect or value the World Trade Organization. We don't value the World Health Organization. We will look out for our own needs in our own fortress. But in the meantime, don't make the mistake of imagining that we are not the dominant power. And so Trump offers deals. You make a deal with the United States and dominance. Carney offered middle power values-based cooperation. I really like that phrase. And I think it's clear. The Europeans and the rest of the world, in a sense, are still talking about Carney and his speech. He's the head of the Canadian Liberal Party. He's the successor in the same party of Justin Trudeau, a party that was begun by Pierre Trudeau, Justin's father. And the other ice. And I'm arguing here that Donald Trump's goon tactics have backfired. You've already picked up on that, I'm sure. You're as aware of that as I am. This is Minneapolis, of course. The crowds confronting ICE. This is Minneapolis on the day of the shutdown of business in protest of the presence of ICE. You've got the media coverage, which has absolutely enraged the public, deepening their disgust. You've got the real awareness of the fear and trauma of these immigrant communities that has eroded local cooperation and trust. And I'm talking about local law enforcement as well, who have turned against ICE just as surely as the communities have. Legal challenges raised in the courts have spotlighted the lawlessness of ICE, the way ICE operates. And here's a prediction. I think that swing state voters, and we already have a lot of indications that it's playing out this way, swing state voters this year, in this midterm election year, and in 2028 as well, very likely, are likely to reject this whole situation, the chaos of ICE. Look at that. That's Minnesota. But here's a very interesting piece that appeared in the New York Times on the 30th of January by a terrific essayist who's on Substack, if you ever follow Substack or use or rely on Substack, Lydia Polgreen. And she wrote that this week, and she's talking about the week that ended January 30th, has revealed three types of Americans. Really a nice piece. On the one hand, bystanders and accommodationists. Bystanders and accommodationists, who might they be? And she says, you need look no farther than the event that took place on the same day, just hours after the murder of Alex Pretty, and that is the gathering of 50-odd of the wealthiest and most influential people in the United States for the premiere, for the first screening of Melania, the biopic, the documentary Melania, which one reviewer that I saw today said it called a $45 million descent into the void. Was actually more than 45 million. It was 45 million or 40 million to produce. And then another 35 million that Jeff Bezos, who financed the whole thing, spent on promoting the movie. Then there are the aggressors. And these are folks that all work out of the White House one way or another. Kristi Noem, Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. Stephen Miller, who's behind everything that has to do with immigration. Deputy White House Chief of Staff. Catherine Leavitt, Press Secretary, who Someone said recently that she's an example of what happens when the ventriloquist dies and the dummy goes on talking. And finally, Megyn Kelly. All of these people have accused the people that were murdered, Renee Nicole Good and Alex Jeffrey Pretty, and others who have been brutalized by ICE, of being domestic terrorists. And there's ICE in action. And finally, there are the resistors. And in the first block are Nicole Good, Renee Nicole Good, and Alex Pretty. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten this woman's name, but she was the famous lady in pink who courageously continued, even though she was pushed and shoved and ordered to desist, to film the brutalization and then the murder of Alex Pretty. The reason we have the footage we do is because she wouldn't give up. And then just the courage of the Minneapolis protesters. And I just love these two signs. We the people, with an LGBTQ flag, no kings in America. And it had never occurred to me that you can't spell hatred without red hat. These are the No Kings protests, samples Minneapolis and other cities around the country, including Chicago. Another No Kings protest in Washington. A anti-ICE protest in LA. And then I love this picture, Washington. These are both anti-ICE protests, Washington, and you recognize Chicago. Now, here's another interesting thing to think about. And I recommend this article to you. It's in The Atlantic, the 24th of January. Two sociologists, Yudkin and Hawkins, didn't have room for their first names, that's all. But it's really a good piece. 4 types of Trump supporter. And there are the 4 red hats. And the first, which is the group that we identify as the base, largely made up of Gen X and baby boomers who believe that God is on their side. This is where the evangelicals largely fall. This is a very strongly Christian nationalist cadre, if you will, of the movement. God is on our side in the struggle between good and evil, and this accounts for about 29% of the MAGA or Trump supporters, not all MAGA. Many of these people are not MAGA. Anti-woke conservatives, they're secular, affluent, they're much more educated than the base, but they tend to be angry about the left's takeover of school and cultures and institutions. Think suburbia. Think pretty educated, pretty conservative suburban voters. Now, one thing to understand is that as we move down through these 4 groups, they grow greater and more distant from the hardcore base. But nevertheless, they're still part of the club. The conversation that surrounds them, the conspiracy theories in which they are steeped, they all drink from the same wells, but they are sold on the MAGA doctrine and sold on Trump to very different degrees. So this suburban anti-woke group is about 21%. So add those two, those are the harder core groups, that amounts to 50%. And then mainline Republicans, very racially diverse group. These are middle of the road folks. They're concerned about the border. They want the economy to be strong, and they want the culture to be stable. Cultural stability. What does that mean? I don't want racial imbalance. I don't want racial balances and racial dynamics changing. I don't want gender dynamics changing. I absolutely don't want to think about trans people and so on. I want a stable environment, a stable cultural environment. But these are your basic longtime Republicans who nevertheless have drunk some of the same Kool-Aid. That's about 30%. You should be asking yourself, as things go south for Trump, as Trump's a soft underbelly, that's a terrible use of that image, is more and more exposed as this whole ice travesty and the Greenland travesty and his appearance at Davos, as all of this becomes clearer and clearer and clearer, which of these groups is likely to peel away or to have its alliance with Trump weakened, and which will remain hardcore. The first will remain hardcore. The reluctant right. Now, this is a group that includes, by and large, independents, younger voters, and so on, not part of the base. Only about half of these people are members of the Republican Party, and they're very ambivalent about Trump, but they picked him somehow as less bad, which means they have imbibed some of the Kool-Aid, if you will. If you put these two weaker groups, weaker in their alignment with Trump, together, you get another 50%. So keep this in mind. Which groups are likely to begin to peel away? Now, this is something that I think you'll want to think about. There's an extraordinary lawyer and essayist and scholar named Ernst Frankl, who died in 1975. He was born and raised, of course, in Germany, came to this country to study, and studied actually at the University of Chicago, and stayed here. He wouldn't return to Germany until about 1951, but he became an assiduous student of the Nazi state. And he was interested in two different dimensions of the Nazi state: the normative, which is self-explanatory, and the prerogative. Prerogative, that's actually the word that we all pronounce prerogative, but it's prerogative, and prerogative means having to do with certain privileges that belong to an individual or a group, certain kinds of privilege. So the normative situation, the normative state, the prerogative state, the privileged state, the state in which special privileges obtain. This is Ernst Frankl. And this is his book. This is republished in 2010, but it was first published in 1944, if I'm not mistaken. It's called The Dual State, and its subtitle is A Contribution to the Theory of Dictatorship. And it is, I haven't read the book, but I've read several précis of it and analyses of it, and it seems to be completely amazing. But I do understand his argument, which is that the state functions under the Nazi regime were divided between the normative side and the prerogative side. And the normative, as the name would suggest, operated according to rules and regulations that were understood by everyone. The prerogative sphere was one that had its own rules. And in that sphere, violence was permitted and even celebrated. So what we're talking about is the Nazi theory that lies behind ICE lawlessness. A violent, prerogative political force, empowered, if you will, privileged, operating according to its own rules, but shielded by normative rhetoric. So we pretend that everything is as it should be. These people who have been brutalized in the street or even shot down in the street, it's tragic, but they deserved it because they were operating as domestic terrorists. So that's normative rhetoric. They violated the law against domestic terrorism. The rhetoric is normative. The reality is prerogative. And this, it seems to me, is where your mainline Republicans and the reluctant right, those are the bottom two groups of the four groups of Trump supporters, may be beginning to leave the Trump train. I love this image with the use of color. This is a guy, and there's a backstory here, a guy who was simply protesting and yelled something at ICE and was immediately grabbed along with the person who he was with, was grabbed and thrown to the street. Eventually, he'll be down on the street, handcuffed and taken away. Doesn't look like a domestic terrorist to me. So is this starting to exact a price, is what I'm trying to say, among independents, for example? Now, this is from a very recent poll. 27% of independents, this is Quinnipiac if you're interested, one of the most reliable pollsters. 27% of independents approve of Trump's job handling, but 67% disapprove. That's a net of 20%. You may notice these days we see a lot of net tallies when we're looking at polls, and that is you take those who approve of a topic or an individual and so on, and subtract from that total those who disapprove. If it gives you a positive number, then that's a good result. That simply means that there are more who approve than disapprove. If you get a negative number, as you do here, that means there are more who disapprove than there are who approve. So 27, the net job approval among independents of Donald Trump in January was minus 40. Minus 40. That's a record low. Now, needless to say, in 2020, when Trump did very, very well among independents, his approval outstripped his disapproval by far. This is a huge, huge turnaround. And look at that. There you see, this is his first term, and now the first week of, or the first month of his second term. Look at that. It's simple. You don't have to analyze the graph. And here's another group to look at, young voters. Now, this, I have to explain this to you and help you to get a sense of it. But look at the lower graph, the bar graph. That's 2020. And in 2020, Donald Trump was able to secure in the 2020 election about, say, 35% of young voters. And the rest went to Democrats, voters, right? But in 2024, he did much, much better. Somewhere between 45 and 50% of young voters went with Donald Trump, and the rest went with the Democrats. That is huge, and it's a big part of why he won. But let's look at approval ratings since March. Look at the top bar. And in March of 2025, Donald Trump still had 44% of young voters approving of his job action, if you will. But now in January, that 44 has dropped to 32. That's a huge drop. It's a drop of 11.8 percentage points, and that's very, very significant. So here's just a little fillip to add. If Trump's approval among young voters dropped 11 points, overall it dropped 5.9 percentage points. Look at that. In March, his overall approval was at basically at 48% and disapproval at 40. Overall approval versus disapproval. On the right is disapproval. Overall approval was 47.3, but in January it's dropped significantly to 41.4. So he loses 11.8 percentage points among young voters and 5.9 overall. Very significant. It's no wonder that people are talking about a blue wave. And now pundits are beginning to toy with the idea that the blue wave may not just extend to the House of Representatives. The current smart money suggests, whatever that means, that let's say the balance of pollsters suggests that Democrats will indeed reclaim the House, but what are their chances in the Senate? Until about 2 months ago, the general thinking was that Democrats had a very, very slim chance of taking back the Senate. Now things are looking much more upbeat. Still, I would say it's weighted on the Republican side, but it's changing constantly. And here's an interesting thing to consider, that the courts are confronting MAGA. And what I've written here is that this is an era of congressional gridlock, but the courts have become the place where politics moves next. In other words, nothing gets done in the Congress, so where does politics move? It moves to the courts. And here, I love this image. This is from an article that talked about how the lower courts are issuing constant injunctions, hamstringing some of the presidential executive orders. It's a fascinating article, but I'm not going to take you through that now. But the federal judiciary has become the referee, especially as regards these executive orders. Federal judges have repeatedly enjoined these executive actions, especially when they're concerned with deportation or detention. This is two areas where the federal courts have really jumped in. Meanwhile, there are hundreds of active lawsuits in 2025 and filed in 2026 that have turned the federal courts into a central barrier against Trumpism. Lower courts, and this is abstracted from that article with the Gulliver Trump tied down as the courts weigh in. Lower courts have been issuing class-wide injunctions constraining some of his most aggressive executive orders. But if you're interested in all of this, there's a website you really need to know about, especially if you're in the law or fascinated with the law. It's called justsecurity.org. I'm not going to try to describe what they do on that website, but it's really absolutely fascinating. Just go to justsecurity.org, and the website itself is terrific, well done, intriguing, interesting. But if you look at the top bar, you'll find a case tracker for cases that involve the Trump administration. And currently, the case tracker that you find in the top bar of Just Security is tracking 596 cases that are challenging MAGA or the administration or Trump directly. And here's a picture of the web page, part of the web page. And here up at the top is what we're looking for, the Trump administration litigation tracker. And I just thought I'd show you a page. Here are several of the cases. There are 596 of them. You can read the complaint. You can read in this column if there's any resolution. It's still awaiting a ruling. Case is closed. You can find out what happened, what's going on, what are the arguments that have been made, what's at issue. It's absolutely fascinating, unless you're not at all fascinated with that kind of stuff. I am. Now, I thought we'd do this and wind up more or less with this. Maybe one more piece after this, but from the president's laptop, Donald Trump has this Truth Social feed, and that's the image of him that appears next to his posts, which have the header @Real Donald Trump. If you want to refer to Trump on as used to be Twitter and now X, you use the hashtag @Real Donald Trump. Anyway, that's his handle. That's the way you identify Donald Trump or reach him and that sort of thing. And this is the way he heads his posts on X. On Truth Social, which is his website. I'm sorry, not his website, his app. Anyway, from the president's laptop, let me just read this. He's turned his Truth Social feed into an artificial intelligence powered madhouse. Constantly, and I'm talking sometimes 30, 40, 50, 60 times a day, posting synthetic images and videos that vary from the absurd to the utterly hateful, and I should say, to the truly disgusting. Some of them are hyper-realistic deep fakes that glorify him, larger-than-life strongman or mythic hero, I'll show you that, or grotesque caricatures of his opponents, or racially charged, dehumanizing portrayals. You all know about this most recent one. What's the point of all this? To provoke, to troll, but I think this is most important, to normalize an extremist politics in which unreality and cruelty are simply part of the entertainment. Cruelty and unreality. And we're just going to look at some of these. This is actually something that he has posted, and this is everywhere, and variations on this theme everywhere at Trump rallies, on Trump-related websites, and so on. Trump as the superhero. And somehow the ridiculousness of this is lost on him. He posted this. Now, this is a very sad and interesting story. This is a young woman named Nikita Levy Armstrong. That's her name. She's a lawyer. She's the former longtime president of the Minneapolis NAACP. She's a leader of women's organizations and active in these protests. And this is her arrest photo, the photo on the left. This was released by Kristi Noem's office. But soon after that, the White House released this doctored one, which had changed her from a very composed young woman to a weeping, hysterical person. And I guess it's supposed to convey her guilt that she realizes she's been caught as a domestic terrorist. She's ashamed. She's fearful of what she has brought on herself. You read it however you want, but it's a fake. And it was issued by the White House. It was posted by the White House. This is the way she looks. This is Hakeem Jeffries, Minority Leader of the House, and Chuck Schumer. Donald Trump posted this picture. He does this often, puts sombreros and mustaches on people he doesn't care for, usually black people, suggesting that they are Hispanic. Who knows what goes on in his mind? This is a picture of Kamala, a portrait, an AI image of Kamala Harris addressing a communist rally in Chicago, posted by Donald Trump. I want you to think for a minute, if Barack Obama were to post any of these, imagine we'd still be talking about it. Even if Barack Obama posted this image of himself, let's say, with a group of black teenagers, even if it was real, he would be taken to task, especially if he faked it. Can you imagine if Barack Obama faked a picture of himself with black teenagers? This is completely fake. Who knows what Donald Trump is up to? And this was actually posted by Donald Trump. Here he is planting the U.S. flag on Greenland. This is really curious. Right soon after he announced that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States, he posted this. It's called "Oh Canada." He stands there with a Canadian flag, gazing out over a Canadian vista, except that's the Matterhorn, which is not in Canada. It's an alpine view. It's the Alps. Who knows? Once again, what goes on in his mind? What point was he trying to make? Oh, Canada. Oh, no. Oh, Switzerland. This one is outrageous beyond. The Trump Gaza Hotel here's Gaza remade by Donald Trump and associates. Here's Trump and Netanyahu lounging poolside, and the big gold statue, he does like his gold, of Donald Trump in the middle of a rebuilt Gaza. I find this one particularly annoying. Taylor Swift is as far from being a supporter of Donald Trump as it's possible to get. Taylor wants you to vote for Donald Trump. This is after Donald Trump has repeatedly trashed and defamed Taylor Swift again and again. Now, the next one, I thought about whether to show you or not. It is truly offensive, but we'll go ahead. Oh, yes, this is truly offensive. And the National Conference of Catholic Bishops issued a formal protest. He posted this right after Pope Francis died. If you have any question of whether or not we're dealing with a completely compos mentis person, this should answer it. This is the one I was talking about. On the No Kings protest, he supposedly got in a jet plane labeled King Trump, wearing a crown, and dropped human waste on the protesters. Can you imagine? This came from the desk of the President of the United States. And then this, yesterday, or day before yesterday, that has caused an enormous firestorm. And Donald Trump has said he has nothing to apologize for. He did nothing wrong. You should keep in mind that Michelle Obama and Barack Obama are two of, by far, the most popular political figures in the United States today. And we're going to end with this little piece from Robert Reich. Robert Reich was one of my best friends in college. We were fraternity brothers. And in my senior year, at the end of my senior year, when I ran for student government, Bob Reich managed my campaign. And by the way, we won. He's 4'9" tall. You may or may not know that about him. And his autobiography, first autobiography, was called "Coming Up Short." Anyway, he says we're at two tipping points. Are we moving deeper into a fascist state or towards something else? He says, in one way, it does seem like we're tipping into fascism. You got ICE and the Border Patrol, extrajudicial executions, impunity, and so on. But on the other hand, there's another way of looking at it. Are we at a tipping point of a different kind? America tipping toward mass revulsion of Trump and the people around him. And I love this line from Bob Reich. Brilliant, brilliant guy. In the darkness of Trump, we're finding the light of America. You know, he was Bill Clinton's Secretary of Labor, and Time magazine a few years ago identified him as one of the top 10 most effective cabinet members of the 20th century. Anyway, we're going to stop with that. 1 minute too long, but I don't think Vanessa is going to give me a hard time.
I am not. I was Googling quickly, so in the chat are the articles that Jim was talking about, and but now we have him here. So there is one question in the chat, which Diane, I hope you're on and you can unmute. Do we know what percent of voters are MAGA? I mean, are you talking about all the overall voters or?
Hi, this is Diane. I'm sorry I can't get video right now.
Hi, Diana.
Jim, thank you so much for that wonderful, informative, and important presentation.
Thanks, Dan.
It was really magnificent. We always talk about MAGA as being a swing vote and all. And we are seeing, as you pointed out, a change in support for Trump with certain demographics. What percentage of the voting population does MAGA represent? That if these other demographics vote against Trump, can MAGA still prevail?
Yeah, that's as you might imagine, a very hard question for pollsters to get at.
Yes.
But in general, consistently self-identified as MAGA, are you MAGA? Do you feel strongly about MAGA? That's around 30%. And in our four demographic groups, the hardline MAGA came in at 29%. That's more or less the case. I would say that I don't think any of these, of the four groups, the one in the lower right, which is the reluctant right, not necessarily part of the base and so on, independents and young people, that's the group that is most likely or whose some significant portion of which is most likely to turn against Trump. Mainline Republicans are still going to have a hard time voting for a Democrat, but they might very well. The question will be in 2028, not whether Donald Trump is going to run again, because that despite what he thinks, that's pretty much constitutionally ruled out. But which line from the Republican Party, who are the inheritors, if you will? Will it be J.D. Vance, who is MAGA, has become MAGA to the core? One never knows what he really stands for, what he really believes. He was as anti-Trump as anyone out there until he wasn't. But there are other voices within the Republican Party. And would mainline Republicans gradually shift away from the MAGA group? There will be a MAGA group. It's very strong. Republicans in Congress, I know I'm wandering, but it's all part of a piece. Republicans in Congress are strongly MAGA. And they will be involved in the decision about who will be the next standard bearer for the Republican Party. Will mainline Republicans swim against that tide? I think the reluctant right the lower right group is going to be very difficult for Republicans in general to hang on to. But MAGA, I don't think has ever been much more than 30%. And
Thank you.
by the way, that's not going to go away. That's rock solid.
Right. Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. That's a good one.
Mark, go ahead.
Are Republicans even going to be allowed to form presidential campaigns to run for president? Or
Can you
is
say
Trump, does
say
Trump
that
think
again? I'm
he's going
sorry.
to pick the next president? In other words, well, Josh Hawley was there was thoughts that he might be looking to form a presidential campaign, and Trump was trying to put it down already. He must think in his mind that he's going to control who the Republican nominee is in
Oh,
28.
absolutely. He thinks that. That's really a good
But will
observation.
Republicans be able to form campaigns and really run? Normally, you'd get a dozen people running for president.
Let me just offer you a somewhat hypothetical, but not very, scenario. What if it happens in the midterms that Republicans lose the House, but lose the House by a lot? Now, it's not unusual for the swing, especially when there's a sitting president and so on, for the president's party to lose 20 seats, 30 seats in House elections. That's not unusual. I think that the situation is set up to favor at least that significant or more significant a loss of House seats. If that happens, and if let's say the Republican majority in the Senate is cut down further, or even, from my lips, even if Republicans lose the Senate, then that pretty much wipes out Donald Trump's effectiveness in determining who the next standard bearer is. Because it will be very clear to everyone that the reason for those catastrophic losses took place, if they do, was Donald Trump. If, on the other hand, Republicans hold strong in the Senate and their losses in the House are minimal, or heaven forfend, let's say they hang on to the House, then Donald Trump will be in a very strong position. And he will be thinking of running himself, but that's not going to happen. That's a really good question, Mark, but my gut feeling is that he's going to be out of it.
So Bill, I hope that that answered your question of, if the House.
I'm sorry. I thought it was Mark.
That was Mark, but Bill in the chat said what's going to happen if they take the House and not the Senate, and I think you addressed that.
Sort of.
Yeah. Then Joanne says, do you have any recommendations for how to help longstanding Trumpers let go of their stance and save face to themselves and others?
I used to be, this sounds like a reach, but I used to be very involved, as your intro suggested, in the global interreligious movement. One of the most frequent questions I received was, how do you talk to fundamentalists about interreligious dialogue? So my answer was always, you don't, because it's a waste of your time and it's a waste of their time. They are constitutionally predisposed not to be able to have that conversation. It causes too much cognitive dissonance. So you're not going to have a productive conversation with a MAGA person. With someone from the reluctant right who's already thinking that way, you can have a productive conversation. Especially, it seems to me, if I want to put in my 2 cents worth with someone, young voters who were predisposed or who were toying with voting for Trump, but now feel reluctant and maybe still have no trust in the Democratic Party. That well has been poisoned. Those are the people you want to talk to. Mainline Republicans, maybe you are one, in which case, by all means, have a conversation with the person next to you or the person you're married to. But I think the conversations that can bear the most fruit are conversations, and this is a general rule with young people, with thoughtful young people.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. And the two things that are going through my mind right now are the people who voted for Trump because he was less bad. Maybe we have, we could do some work with them. And Robert Reich saying that the tide is going to turn. And that's, we've been hoping for that for a long time, but I think that's what we have to do. And I'm sure at Macomb we're going to be postcarding and all of that stuff. We'll just tell people to vote. If you want to vote, if you want to go with a certain party, I encourage that as well. But we
Yeah,
will do.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you gave us um, you gave us so much to think about this morning. I can only thank you again, and I will get to you this week because we'll get you for the Sunday after the midterms. I always give you the hardest Sunday possible where you can't.
Unless it really works out as I say it's going to,
Right,
then I'll be happy to come.
right.
If
Okay.
it's a disaster, I'm going to be out of town.
All right,
By
Jim.
the way, it's Bob Reich.
Bob Reich. And now I'm going to think about that he ran your campaign. I've always liked him.
I have too. He's a terrific guy.
Yeah. All
One of the
right.
smartest people I've ever known.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you, everyone. Great morning, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Mark.